Hello there, a very good evening and welcome to this edition of Recount Watch. I'm your host, Eddy Layne, and of course, I'm joined by Mr. Joe Hamilton, who will be with me for the next half an hour as we review today's proceedings of the National Recount of March 2nd General and Regional Election. Situation that we've reached to a point more than 2 months after those elections where we're now trying to recount ballots and trying to determine the results and the way people voted in those elections. Joe, good evening and welcome to the discussion.
Hi, very good evening again. Well, what happened overnight? You would know that viewers, just to remind you, but for those who are yet to understand the facts about last night, we put online information regarding some of the ballot boxes or polling stations that Mr. Mingo attempted to manipulate the numbers. And just for reference, it's about 6 polling places, and just at those 6 polling places, the votes cast that was manipulated amounted to something like 350 odd votes. And so people must recognize the scope of what the attempt was. And that this is just the beginning of that information about the manipulation or the attempted manipulation of the ballots cast in the different divisions. So if we start and we just do 6 so far, and we have 350 odd thousand votes, 350 odd votes with just 6 boxes we're talking about. And you would note some instances it was 100, one I think I recall 99, and different numbers at different times. And this is just the beginning. As we come down lower East Bank into Diamond or Sterling and all those places, you will see, viewers would see what we are talking about and what we were talking about all the time regarding what the attempt was by the APNU AFC to have this official, the returning officer, manipulate votes cast in their favor. So that is what has happened overnight. I would note, Eddy, you know, all day I'm looking to see the Facebook cabal of the big cabal on social media. For whatever reason, they were very silent today based on what I know. And you would be on there more than I do, I suppose. So you would know whether they were not. But I really didn't see them seeking to fabricate and to misinform like they were doing the last 3 days. I note that Harman and Ramjatan has come out to participate and to speak to the press. But the narrative, as we continue to say to viewers that they are attempting to peddle, is that the voting process was filled with a lot of discrepancies. But viewers must recognize that these are the same people who, right through the period, they were saying that elections day, March 2nd, you had no flaws with the voting. Up to this week, Granger in his presentation indicated that there was no difficulty at the election process on March 2nd. The observers, the diplomatic community, whether local or international observers, all spoke to the activities on March 2nd. But they now are attempting to take that narrative to the public. And they have, because they know they lost, because they know the ballots in the boxes will speak for themselves, like they have been doing, and the ballots will confirm the People's Progressive Party civic numbers that they have on the statement of poll given to us the night of March 2nd. So they're not anymore discussing vote scarce. They're discussing whether a dead person voted without no evidence, of course. They're discussing whether overseas Guyanese voted. The fact is, and Eddy, we have had this discussion before elections.
Yes, certainly.
Justice ruled on that matter. That once a person's name was on the list, that person is qualified to vote at the election. And that is what that case was about, that you couldn't take off a name off the list because that person is living overseas or is studying overseas or is on vacation overseas. Because the law allows for, once you're a Guyanese, by birth, you are allowed to vote once you're 18 years of age. So residency, as the Chief Justice indicated then, is not a requirement for voting. And therefore, it's a frivolous conversation to suggest that people who live overseas voted, you know, and Armand and what's her name, Cummins, and a lot, they went overseas to encourage Guyanese who were registered to come home and vote. So you can't have it both ways. You went on a big slash and a binge overseas to Washington and to New York and to Atlanta to encourage people to come home and vote who were registered. And now you're saying that you have a difficulty with the fact that people who live overseas, they voted. So that is what has been happening. We know that at the level of GCOM, we have some difficulties there, where today GCOM again has changed the rule as regards this observation report. Now they have been live streaming the contents of the observation report, somebody calling it out like they were calling out the numbers. I know I saw Commissioner Gonrad's indicating that that matter was discussed with the chairman, and she is to review whether that is necessary or not. The fact is, it is not necessary. An observation report, it is what it is.
Observation.
To a process and to write a report and to give it to the parties and to have them sign whether they agree with what the contents are, and put before them by the supervisor of the recount station. So we continue to make the point. The order speaks to the recount of ballots. That is what the order speaks to. There is nothing about an observation report in the gazetted order that GCOM put before the Guyanese public. But now, recognizing that they cannot change the ballots cast that are in the box, they have moved away from that conversation to attempting to magnify what they call discrepancies, rather the presiding officer strike out the names of persons registered or not, persons who voted rather. That is the big fundamental question there, the issue they have before them. But people must be reminded that the conversation about who voted, we know for us and most people who are listening to me, I'm sure you voted. And you know what the process was and the procedures. You go into the GCOM polling area, they call your name, they ask for an ID card, and they seek to corroborate the ID card photograph of the person with the photograph that they have in the folio that the presiding officer they had in their possession, and that also the agents they have. So the question is how a person can impersonate a so-called dead person and vote for that person who's deceased when you have your agents there up no AFC. Unless you're saying that your agent conspired with GCOM to allow for a person who was deceased, for a person to vote for a deceased person. So you can't have it both ways. You have to decide what you want and what you say. So that is the issue they speak to now. And yesterday they had the issue about the smudge 6-digit on the ballot, whether it was a valid ballot or not. That was clarified by GCOM. Now the major issue that they have, that they're magnifying, is having the amount of ballots matching the names ticked off by the presiding officer. The question is, if the presiding officer fell asleep or left and went to the washroom or wasn't paying attention to their process, that has nothing to do with the elector. That is for GCOM to regularize that with the presiding officer and not to penalize the person who voted. And yesterday they had some issue with whether 20 names were ticked off in some box and they're to make a decision on that. So as we go along, we know that the APNU AFC will continue to attempt to magnify those issues that are procedural issues, those issues that in no way affect the ballots cast that are in the box. That is what we are paying.
But Joe, a number of things you mentioned, and what we recognize, because let's take, for example, the observation report. They realized that when they spread their propaganda, the James Bonds and Sharon Duncans and so on social media, that people are quickly rejecting those and are countering those with facts and evidence. And I think a lot of frivolous matters, I understand, or issues are being recorded in their observation report to use the recount to give some sort of credence to those frivolous matters. So they want the report to be read so that they can spread their propaganda and their lies about the process through the GCOM mechanism. And, you know, when you hear them talking about persons from overseas voting and all sorts of things, one has to recall that Felix, when he was dealing with the issue of migrants from the Haitians and so forth, said that the borders are porous and he could not account for thousands of people. But he is able now to say who voted from overseas and who didn't vote from overseas. Where did they get the information to determine whether someone will have traveled here or not to vote. And I think those are the frivolous matters and the propaganda that they want to use GCOM through this observation report to spread.
No, but the thing is, let us assume during elections time, someone came to Guyana who is a Guyanese, who might have been registered. The immigration, I suspect, will have that information.
That information.
And that is what they're attempting to utilize. The thing is that that person that voted, once their name was on the list, they're qualified to vote because the qualification was to be registered, and that matter is already settled. So to try to bring that matter up again as a matter to try to suggest that there was something untoward on elections day is baloney, is nonsensical. And as I said earlier, they can't have it both ways. They praised the Elections Commission for carrying out a flawless election on March 2nd. They praised the Elections Commission right through the period. When we had difficulty with the Elections Commission, they were praising the Elections Commission. And I mean, up to this week, as I said earlier, Granger, in his presentation, when he said he will accept the results of the recount, he spoke about a flawless process on March 2nd. He said that. So they can't come back now. One time you're saying the process was flawless, and now you're attempting to say that the process was marred with irregularities and discrepancies. You can't have it both ways. People are seeing through that. But the point is, Eddy, is attempting to find a narrative to peddle. And it goes back to the conversation we were having before elections. You see now, they didn't get to do their mischief by manipulating votes. They have to fall back, and you asked about that last night. When they were saying, we won, they couldn't discredit the process. Now, the recognition that no more they can peddle they won is upon them. They now have to fall back on the old PNC narrative of 92, 97, 2001, 2006. That the process was responsible for us losing. That is what the cabal now has to sell to their supporters. Because they, as we continue to say, Harman and Trotman and Valder Lawrence and most, if not all, of the leadership of the APNU, of the PNC rather, I couldn't say APNU, they have the statements of poll in their possession and they know what the results are. They could have only gotten away, they would have been only able to get away with the narrative of we won if they got through with the conspiracy with Mingo and Myers and Lowenfield to manipulate the results in the favor of APNU. Now that boat has already sailed. That train has left the station.
But Joe,
on the other narrative.
But Joe, one has to put this in perspective too. You claimed initially that you won the elections. Forget you claimed that the elections were free and fair and you were commending GCOM and so on. You claimed that you won the elections. One has to remember the Mingo declarations. So this is APNU AFC saying, hey, we won the elections fair and square. But now that there is a recount, you're saying, oh, there was fraud. There were persons who came in and vote who were not supposed to vote. There are dead people voting. Oh, more persons were ticked off than, or less persons who voted were ticked off. So are you confessing then? And this is how people will see through them. Are you confessing that you won the elections by fraudulent means? We have been saying that their victory that they were claiming was through fraud. They are now saying, hey, PPP, you guys were right. We were trying to win the elections through fraud.
Yes, yes. But what is funny, the thing is, Eddie, as I said, it's trying, they have to say something to their supporters. Remember, when Mingo was dancing with the numbers, what they were saying to their supporters is that we won. But now, we won is thrown through the window because the numbers are speaking for themselves. So they now have to say to their supporters that we lost, but this is the reason why we lost. You understand me? That the PPP was involved in some fraud and skullduggery, as Joe Harmon in his interview with Gordon Mosley was attempting to say, because they have to give their supporters something to hold on to. And what they're attempting to do is the same thing that was done in 97, 2001, 2006, to say that we lost because of these circumstances. But the reality is, the PPP is not responsible for running the elections. The PPP is not responsible for selecting presiding officers and returning officers and the secretariat and whatever. It is the Guyana Elections Commission, of which they have 3 commissioners there, and they have their man Lowenfield there, and they have their woman Myers there doing their bidding. So we have no authority, as Granger always says. The commission is autonomous and independent. That is what it is. So we have nothing to do. And we had, other than assigning polling agents and party scrutineers and that kind of thing, we had nothing to do with the management of the elections process. Right? The Guyana Elections Commission, an independent and autonomous agency, they were responsible. So it is the Guyana Elections Commission, they have to ask the questions that they have a difficulty with how the process went. They have to ask the Guyana Elections Commission that. They think, but now, Eddie, we have these manipulated numbers, and more will come out. And you would note, Eddie, they have no answers for that. You would, I'm looking all day to see what are the answers for the manipulated numbers that increase votes for APNU AFC by Mingo. How do they explain that? How do they explain it? I see Armand doing a lot of talking today and Ramjatan. And you know, sometimes I am so aggravated by these persons who purport to be journalists in this country. What we have, and is not beat, is mostly reporters we have. A man speaks and they report what he speaks.
Well, some of them, Joe. We shouldn't say all of them. There's some of them.
No, I'm not broad brushing. I'm saying the difficulty I have with. Last night we put out these fraudulent numbers, matching the SOR with Mingo numbers. And I'm looking for one of the people in the media to ask Armand the question, how do you explain this? Tell us, how do you explain the fraudulent numbers that Mingo had put before the Guyanese people in your favor? Answer that question for us.
But Joe, we're almost out of time. And the reality is, whatever were being attempted is now being exposed. And I think the Guyanese people are smart enough to decipher, who were the ones lying and who were the ones telling the truth. The issue that we have now, though, because I think there is some other sinister plot. All attempts to rig the elections failed. Attempts, I suspect now, to disrupt the recount process and to cast doubt on the process are also failing. But I've heard that there is a plot, a move afoot. You remember Harman asking that cell phones not be, at that stakeholders meeting, that cell phones be prohibited from the counting stations and the tabulation center and so forth. But I want to make the point that the recount order says nothing about the prohibition of cellular phones in the Artichon Convention Center. So I'm looking at a post here, at a message here, which spoke to, there seems to be this plan by people like Roxanne Myers. And I think the time has come for GCOM, the Guyana Elections Commission, to get rid of Roxanne Myers. She seemed to be the person that is the driving force behind a lot of this skullduggery, with support from people like Mary Lowenfield and a lot from the Vincent Alexander, Corbin, and others. So apparently she, along with Corbin and the others, are looking tomorrow to have cell phones removed from counting, from party agents and so forth that are entering those stations. The fact of the matter is, any attempt at skullduggery, the only tool that those persons who are present in there will have to help to gather some sort of evidence will be their cellular phones, hopefully. And we see them telling people that they're going to throw them out because if they live stream and so forth. So,
I suspect attempting to confiscate people's cell phone will have a big ruckus at the convention center. I suspect that, because a cell phone is a private instrument. Who's going to be a custodian of the people's phone? Why they don't want cell phones? People have their cell phones to utilize a private instrument. So that will create a big ruckus, I'm sure. And as you mentioned, there is nothing restricting persons from utilizing and having their cell phones at the convention center or when they're at a counting station. So Ms. Myers failed to understand that your time has passed as regards what you want to do and attempt to do. I mean, these people don't seem to understand. This is not Ashman Building where you had all the control and whatever you think there, and you were the big bulldog at Ashman Building. The situation is a different situation there. And a cell phone, for me, is a private instrument that shouldn't be handed over to anybody. Who is going to keep my cell phone with information there that is private and it's sacred to me, and I'll hand it over to Myers, to these conspirators and these liars and thieves at the Guyana Elections Commission? So, Eddie, the thing is, if you have nothing to fear, you wouldn't have a difficulty with the use of cell phones at the convention center. But I am sure that our people will deal with that matter like they have dealt with all the issues as they come up from day to day. But the important thing citizens must focus on, it is the recount of the ballots. All the other side shows are unimportant to us. The count, and so far, the recount of the ballots, they are validating the People's Progressive Party civic statement of poll and the numbers that we have put before the Guyanese people over 2 months ago. That is the most important thing as regards the recount exercise, Eddie.
Joe, I want to thank you very much for joining me this evening. Of course, we're going to be back here tomorrow evening. You thought we'll be standing in for me at 8 p.m. To have this discussion as we continue to track and to gather information as to what is happening here at the Artichon Convention Center, where the national recount is taking place. Joe, thank you so much for being here again, man.
I thank you for having me.
And our viewers, we want to thank you very much for joining us. Look out for us tomorrow evening as we continue to keep you updated. And bye for now.